Hi there, my name's Karen Taylor. I'm the founder of Parent Cloud and the Wellness Cloud. We work in partnership with businesses offering their employees access to a variety of specialists, so including coaching and therapy and menopause and fertility and lots of other things. It's basically to help businesses to have a positive impact on employees' mental health and engagement and gender diversity. Prior to setting up those businesses, I was also a career coach. So I worked within a large investment house in the city for about 10 years, helping individuals focus on their career and also looking at things like resilience, which is what we are focusing on today. Resilience seems to be a really hot topic at the moment. So even prior to the arrival of coronavirus, there's been a really growing awareness of the impact of resilience on our performance at work. So what we're going to be looking at today is what it is, how it can impact our lives. I'm also going to introduce you to a way to measure your own levels of resilience, to understand where your personal strengths and weaknesses are and what you may need to work on. And then finally, I'm going to run you through a few exercises that I used to use when I was working as a coach. These exercises, they'll always be a little bit more effective when you're working with a coach or chatting through your thoughts with someone. But I've picked these ones specifically as I really do think that you'll still be able to have a positive impact on your level of resilience, even if you just run through them by yourself. So firstly, if we look at the definition of resilience here, so it states that it's the ability to withstand, adapt to and recover from adversity and stress. I think the situation we're in at the moment will probably give us a really good idea of how resilient we can be, but it is very relevant to how we operate at now, I mentioned that I was going to give you an idea of how to measure your resilience. So there have been many studies and theories around resilience and the scales at which it can be measured. There's also some debate about the components that make up a person's level of resilience. I've listed several here in that word cloud on the left. There's lots here, and you'll see that all the terms are really broad. But I think the main takeaway is to understand that your resilience isn't just one thing. It's impacted by your personality, by past events, your ambitions for the future. And while some capability is innate, it doesn't necessarily mean that your level of resilience can't be improved by practicing certain techniques. So I've included a link here to a quick assessment which will give you an understanding of your level of resilience, and also where you may need to focus some effort to build on your personal levels of resilience. So I hope that would be useful. When it comes to the role of resilience in our lives, so it's really important to understand that no one is going to be perfect as much as we may well want to. Everyone can and should fail occasionally and receive criticism and feedback, but the function of our levels of resilience is to enable us to recognise where we may have failed or come up short, to work out ways that we can move forward and ideally bounce back with more energy and enthusiasm having gone through that experience. Now, a lack of resilience impacts many things. So it can impact your motivation, your cognitive function and emotional well-being. We've probably all known someone in our working life and maybe even our home lives who may have struggled with their levels of resilience, and they kind of take on this feeling of helplessness or seeing themselves as a victim. The key for all of us is to spot when we're feeling any of these emotions that are on this slide in a kind of extreme way that may perhaps feel disproportionate to the event itself. And it's at that point that we should really identify and realise that it's when our levels of resilience are really being put to the test and under pressure. So as I mentioned in the introduction, so I'm going to introduce you to a few exercises. These will help you to increase your levels of resilience. Several of them are from the team at Positive Psychology and also from the Career Counselling Service. And there are so many exercises that you can use to build your resilience. I've picked these three here that I think could really make a real difference. And I'm focusing on a few of the specific words in that word cloud that I put earlier on in the presentation. So I'm focusing on optimism, self-reliance, and also purpose. While I'll try and pause a little, albeit this is recorded so you can kind of pause to give yourself some time to think and process. I think you can definitely get the most out of each exercise if you can spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes on them. And also, as I mentioned earlier, if you have someone who you can talk through your thoughts with, who can kind of take on that role of coach and maybe gently probe some of your thoughts, that will definitely make the exercise more valuable. It kind of tends to give you that deeper insight on how you're feeling and what you can do. So if we start with optimism, so Charles Carver, he introduced the term dispositional optimism. So he argued that it's the presence of positive traits that increases the chances of something really good happening to us. And the dispositional theory of optimism, it suggests that optimism leads to positive things happening in our lives, and pessimism leads to more stressful or negative outcomes. It kind of makes sense. I think you can probably relate to it in your everyday life. The main things to take away from the dispositional theory of optimism are that optimism it's built in, it's kind of a personality trait. It is directly associated with reduced levels of depression and anxiety and stress. Optimistic individuals are overall kind of more healthy, both physically and emotionally, than those who are more pessimistic. So it's a great thing to try and become. And it does call for increased resilience and coping strategies. So those who hold to this theory believe a positive outlook helps people to accept themselves unconditionally, and that optimists are less likely to engage in things like denial and avoidance. In the right-hand corner, I've included a link to a questionnaire. It's on the Stanford University website, and I think hopefully you might find it interesting. Basically, it runs you through a series of questions, I think about 40 or so, and it gives you an overall score at the end of where you are on the scale of optimism and pessimism, and it'll give you an idea of how much work you may well need to put into this area particularly. So let's move on to the first exercise. So we're going to start by using the ABCDE model. This model was created by a guy called Albert Ellis. So he's a really important contributor to the ideas behind cognitive behavioural therapy. I'm sure we've all probably heard of it, CBT, and the founder of rational emotive behaviour therapy. So he discovered that people's beliefs really strongly affect their emotional functioning and well-being, and that certain irrational beliefs made people feel more depressed and anxious or angry, and led to kind of a self-defeating behaviour. So it has a real relevance here when we're looking at resilience. It's basically a method to try and rewire the way you think about things. So I'm going to run you through these. Obviously, like I said, you can feel free to pause the recording if you want to kind of think and go through this process yourself at the moment. But if we start with A, so you need to kind of think about an adverse experience that you've had. Could be over the course of the last few weeks or months, or even better, perhaps something that you're experiencing right now. I can think of one that we're probably all in right now. It depends when you're listening to this. But something that's led you to think quite pessimistically. Then what you need to do is write down your beliefs about that adverse event. So that's the B. And then the consequences of these pessimistic beliefs. And then if you move on to the D, which is dispute them in order to feel more energised and optimistic. I personally think the D is probably the most important of all of these things. So really disputing those kind of irrational beliefs that you may hold to a certain situation. So if I run you through a bit of an example of maybe what somebody might be feeling right now. So an example might well be that the kind of point of adversity may well be that somebody is feeling quite nervous about perhaps doing a presentation at work. It's a really normal one that people often feel, and they may well believe that they are not good at it, that people will see that they're very nervous, that it could well have a negative impact on their career and their life in general, that it will lead to them feeling very anxious. And then if we think about the consequences of those beliefs, so the consequences is that individual may well feel very anxious on the run up to a presentation. They may well be less productive because that's something that they're permanently thinking about all the time. It may well naturally lead to them being more anxious during the presentation and actually delivering a worse performance, and just becoming quite self-defeatist. So suddenly turning around and not accepting, not doing presentations that they would ultimately want to do. To help them dispute it, then questions like asking them to why they think that people think they're not good at presentations. What is the evidence that that is the case? Also things like explaining that people probably are very unlikely to really see that someone is as nervous and uncomfortable as they may feel, that the people in the room are likely to know them well and already know that they're very good at their job, that they'd be very interested in the content of the presentation, that they're there because they're interested, and that they're there because they want that individual to succeed, and actually that one perhaps subpar presentation is really unlikely to have a negative impact on somebody's career. And then the hope is that by disputing that those individuals can go on and approach that presentation feeling much more optimistic and much more like that they're going to succeed in it. And that is a kind of thought process that I think can have a really positive impact on the way you approach moments of adversity in your lives. If we move on to the second exercise, and I think this is a really good one, so it uses past experience to help you to cope with something you're experiencing right now. So it helps you to see and work out what has really worked for you in the past, and then it makes you use it to make it work for you again. So, so if you think about a time in your life, ideally something fairly recent that you can remember really well, but it doesn't necessarily matter. And it's a time when you feel like you've demonstrated really strong resilience, and then you write it down. And then kind of identify the people and the supportive people that you went to for support and guidance. And then if you also kind of identify the approach and strategies you used. So what helped you to cope with any negative thoughts and feelings that showed up. And it could be anything. It could be going for a walk, it could be yoga, it could be listening to podcasts, but certain things that helped you to manage those negative thoughts. Then think about what really deep insight helped you to bounce back from it. So what gems of wisdom or insight do you often hold to? So it could be anything. It could be a quote from somebody in the past. It could be something from a book. It could be quotes from somebody famous, or even just learning from your own experience. So something that, yeah, you kind of hold to as a level of insight. The next thing, and I think this is probably the most important in this exercise, is what solution-seeking behaviour did you display and use to help you to deal with a problem? So did you problem solve? Did you seek out new information? Did you plan ahead or negotiate or speak up or voice your opinion or ask for help? And then obviously, write those down. And you maybe pause now, and you could do it as this is recorded, but if you think about that challenging situation, what you can then do, understanding this strategy that you've used in the past, is build a resilience plan. So plan the order in which you tend to access these various things, and create an action plan so that you know that you can use this when you're faced with a moment of adversity again in the future. And yet it's to give you this method and strategy to give you some more confidence that you can overcome these things because you've done it in the past. Now, this last exercise is a really good one in lots and lots of different situations. So studies show that people with a real sense of meaning actually have a 15% lower risk of death, regardless of their age. It also, there are lots of studies that show that purpose-driven employees are actually much more likely to be high performers, and have this higher level of fulfillment in their work. And there was a study, it was conducted in the States actually, but it showed that people with a strong sense of purpose really bounced back from difficult situations much more quickly, and were therefore much more resilient. So really relevant to what we're talking about today. So there are a few different ways that you can approach this. It tends to be, the one you choose will be very linked to the way you best learn. But this first one is the best possible future self exercise. So it was pieced together by Dr. Laura King. It's been shown to really improve overall happiness, reduce goal conflict, plus a host of other benefits too. And so what you do, kind of without any sort of self-editing, without any limitations or inhibitions, so really try not to think about what other people might think, and try to silence that voice that says I can't do this, or this isn't really me. But if you can kind of project yourself into the future, so as a much older self, and if you imagine that everything in your life has gone as well as it possibly could, that you've worked really hard, you've succeeded at accomplishing all of your life's goals, think of it as the realization of all of your life's dreams, and now write about and describe exactly what you imagined. Some people write their own obituary. It's a bit more morbid, but it's what you want people to say about you once you're gone. So it talks about the things that you want to achieve. There's also another exercise which is for people who are probably a bit more creative and a bit more visual in the way they learn. But you can draw out your life as you would like it to be, and so that includes your home, your family, your work, everything and anything that you can think of, and then ideally describe it to somebody else, and talk really in detail about what you're seeing when you picture your world as you'd like it to be. Ideally, having done any of these exercises, you can then write a variety of I want statements. So the things you really want to achieve. And then when you look back over those statements, you really need to make sure that you're feeling genuinely excited about what you've written down. I think that's a really good indicator that that's something that you really genuinely want to do deep down. Now, if we're going to look a little bit at some of the actions to take away from this presentation. So if we start by looking at that bubble in the top left-hand corner, so it says, understand what restores and depletes your energy. So there was a book called, there is a book called Restore Yourself by Edie Greenblatt. It's a great book. It basically presents lots of different strategies for combating kind of professional burnout, really. And it focuses on regularly restoring yourself and your own kind of personal resources. And she refers to the 3 musketeers of resilience. And one of those musketeers is building an understanding of what restores and depletes your energies. So these can change all the time, so you should naturally kind of challenge them a bit. But if you could have a think about the last time you felt really energized, so what were you doing? Who were you speaking to? And then also maybe what was the last time you felt your energy, when was the last time you felt your energy levels sapped? It seems obvious, but if you can try to spend more time doing those things that gives you energy and chatting with the people who you feel really energized interacting with, and ideally spend less time doing those things that depletes your energy, and it would naturally build your resilience. The other thing to try to do is ingrain that ABCDE model into your way of thinking. So especially if you're feeling like you've hit a bit of a block, or you're feeling any of those emotions that were in the presentation earlier at an extreme level, and then to run through that that kind of thought process to try and get yourself to challenge some of those beliefs you hold. And then the other thing is when you're feeling like you're facing something, that kind of adverse type event, then looking at that resilience plan that we talked about that can be really helpful. And it's a lovely thing to know that you have, because then you feel less, you feel much more confident if you're meeting something that is proving particularly challenging in your life. As I've said a couple of times in this, like any form of coaching, ideally you need to find ways to try and make yourself accountable for some of these actions. So setting yourself certain goals, and actually it may well be more effective chatting through those goals with somebody else, because then it may well make you feel a little bit more accountable to try and make them happen for you. And one final thing just to note, and it's in that kind of top right hand bubble, is that those who are found to be the most resilient are ones who have a really strong personal and professional support network. So I think it's always something to work on, and so looking at your current support network, both personally and at work, and seeing if there are any gaps. I know few people really enjoy networking, but reaching out to people professionally that you admire is never really going to be a bad thing for you when it comes to building your resilience. So and also for those of you who aren't comfortable reaching out in that way, just to make yourself think about how you would feel if someone reached out to you. And I think the likelihood is that you would feel quite flattered and you would be really keen to help, and so it's kind of natural that those people are likely to feel the same. So yeah, building your network should definitely help. So I hope some things that we've run through and the exercises, I really hope that they would be useful. But please do reach out if you have any questions. I've always got lots of coaching exercises that I'd be happy to share with anybody if you'd like to. So thank you so much for listening.